Heavy metal history has just lost one of its most recognizable guitarists. Phil Campbell, the musician who spent more than 3 decades standing beside one of the loudest bands in rock history, Motörhead. When the news of his death first appeared, fans around the world reacted with shock. For many people, Phil Campbell was not just a guitarist in a famous band. He was part of the sound that defined Motörhead for an entire generation. Naturally, fans expected something after the announcement. A farewell. A tribute. A final goodbye that would bring musicians, friends, and fans together. But something unexpected happened. Despite the global reaction to his death, there has been an unusual silence surrounding one question. When will the world say goodbye to Phil Campbell? Because right now, that final farewell has not yet been revealed. And for many fans, that silence has created a growing curiosity. What exactly happened in the final days of one of heavy metal's most respected guitarists, and what will his final goodbye look like? To understand that, we first need to understand the man behind the music. The news that shocked the rock world came from Campbell's family. They confirmed that Phil Campbell had passed away peacefully at the age of 64. But the statement also revealed something many fans had not known. Before his passing, Campbell had been fighting a serious medical battle. According to his family, he had spent time in intensive care after undergoing a complex major operation. It was described as a long and courageous fight. For fans who had seen him performing not long before, the news came as a surprise. Because until recently, Phil Campbell still seemed deeply connected to the music world. But the family's message focused not only on his career. They also spoke about the man behind the guitar. They described him as a devoted husband, a wonderful father, and a proud grandfather. Within his family, he had a special nickname. They lovingly called him Bampy. That detail may seem small, but it reveals something important. Behind the loud guitars and the heavy metal reputation, Phil Campbell was also a family man. Someone whose life was built not only on music, but on the people closest to him. And yet, the story of how he reached that point began decades earlier. Long before the world knew his name, Phil Campbell was simply a young guitarist from Wales. Born in Pontypridd, he discovered music early in life. Like many future rock musicians, he picked up a guitar at a young age. At first, it was just passion, practice, curiosity. But over time, that passion slowly turned into something bigger. Local bands, small performances, a growing reputation as a talented guitarist, and eventually, an opportunity that would change everything. In 1984, Campbell joined the band that would define the rest of his career, Motörhead. At the center of that band was one of rock's most iconic frontmen, Lemmy Kilmister. Lemmy was already known for his powerful voice and fearless personality. But a band like Motörhead needed more than just attitude. It needed musicians who could deliver the same energy through their instruments. Phil Campbell quickly proved he was exactly that kind of guitarist. Over time, his playing style became a defining part of the band's sound. Loud, sharp, relentless. For fans of heavy metal, Motörhead was not just another band. It was a symbol of raw rock energy. And Campbell was standing at the center of it. Through the years, the band released albums, toured internationally, and built a reputation as one of the most influential groups in the genre. Songs like Ace of Spades became legendary. And throughout all those years, Phil Campbell remained one of the band's most loyal members. In fact, he spent more than 30 years with Motörhead. For many fans, his guitar work became inseparable from the identity of the band itself. But every long journey eventually reaches a turning point. And for Motörhead, that moment came in 2015. In December of that year, the band lost its leader. Lemmy Kilmister passed away. For fans, it felt like the end of an era. Motörhead had always been built around Lemmy's personality and voice. Without him, continuing the band simply did not feel possible. Soon after his death, Motörhead officially came to an end. For Phil Campbell, that moment closed one of the most important chapters of his life. More than 30 years on stage with the same band had shaped his identity as a musician. But despite that loss, Campbell was not ready to leave music behind. Instead, he chose to begin a completely new chapter. After Motörhead ended, Campbell created a new project. A band that would combine his experience with something even more personal. Phil Campbell and the Bastard Sons. This time, he wasn't performing with strangers or longtime bandmates. He was performing with his own sons. The band included Todd, Dane, and Tyler Campbell. For fans, this new chapter felt meaningful. A legendary guitarist continuing his career alongside his family. The group released music, toured internationally, and built its own audience. While the shadow of Motörhead was always present, the band also developed its own identity. And for Phil Campbell, it seemed like a fresh beginning. In fact, not long before his passing, he performed in his hometown of Pontypridd. The show was sold out. For local fans, it was a proud moment. A hometown musician who had conquered the global rock world, returning to perform for his community. At that point, many people believed Phil Campbell still had many years of music ahead of him. But events were about to take an unexpected turn. According to the statement from his family, Campbell eventually faced a serious medical crisis. He underwent a complex major operation. Complications followed. And soon he found himself in intensive care. Details about the exact medical situation remain limited. But the family described his fight as long and courageous. During that time, updates were scarce. Fans continued to hope for good news. Yet eventually, the message arrived. Phil Campbell had passed away peacefully. The reaction from the music world was immediate. Tributes began appearing across social media. Musicians shared memories. Fans revisited songs and performances that had defined decades of heavy metal history. But while those tributes spread across the internet, another question quietly began appearing. And this question would become one of the most discussed parts of the story. Because after the death of Phil Campbell, something unusual happened. Despite the global attention surrounding his passing, there has been no official announcement about his funeral. For a musician who spent decades shaping one of the most famous heavy metal bands in the world, fans expected a major farewell. A tribute concert, a public memorial, or at least some details about how the music world would say goodbye. But so far there has only been silence. And that silence has raised an important question. Why has the final farewell of a rock legend not yet been revealed? Part of the answer may lie in the wishes of his family. In their statement, they asked for privacy during this extremely difficult time. For them, Phil Campbell was not just a public figure. He was a husband, a father, a grandfather. And grief often requires time and space away from the public spotlight. Still, fans continue to wonder what the future might hold. Because musicians like Phil Campbell rarely leave quietly. Their music lives on. And the communities they helped build often find ways to honor them. Tributes from the rock world have already begun. Artists who worked with Campbell, toured with him, or simply admired his music shared messages of respect and sadness. Among them was the German heavy metal singer Doro Pesch. She said she was at a loss for words. She also said it had been an honor to call him a friend. Motörhead itself also paid tribute to the guitarist who had spent more than 30 years with the band. Their message described him as a wonderful musician and performer. But they also highlighted something else. His personality. According to the tribute, Phil Campbell carried a great sense of humor. He loved life. And he had the ability to make people laugh easily. One line from that tribute stood out to many fans. They described him as an enormous beam of light. For people who knew him personally, that description seemed fitting. Because while his guitar playing helped define the sound of Motörhead, his personality helped define the spirit of the band. So now the question remains. How will the world say goodbye to Phil Campbell? At this moment, no official funeral plans have been announced publicly. But if history has shown anything, it is that legendary musicians often receive farewells that reflect the impact they had on music. Sometimes those farewells are private ceremonies with family and close friends. Other times, they become larger tributes where fellow musicians gather to celebrate a life of music. For someone like Phil Campbell, either possibility could happen. And if such a tribute does take place, it would likely bring together many of the artists and fans whose lives were shaped by his music. But regardless of what form that farewell eventually takes, one thing is already clear. Phil Campbell's legacy does not depend on a single ceremony. It lives in every recording, every performance, and every guitarist who grew up listening to Motörhead's music. Because while Phil Campbell's life has come to an end, one chapter of his story is still waiting to be written. His final farewell. Right now, the world is still waiting to see how that moment will unfold. When the time comes, it will not simply be another funeral announcement. It will be the moment when the rock world pauses to say goodbye to one of the guitarists who helped define its sound. And when that final goodbye finally happens, it will remind everyone of something important. Legends may leave the stage, but their music never truly disappears.